This is a CBC podcast.
For this week's Throwback Thursday, we revisit a speech given by the late Joseph Rich, former Grand Chief of the Innu Nation, on the New Dawn Agreement. The New Dawn Agreement covers the Land Claim and Self-Government Agreement in principle, the Upper Churchill Redress Agreement, and the Lower Churchill Innu Impact and Benefits Agreement. Rich gave this speech in June of 2011, 2 days before the agreement was voted on. He called it the most important decision in the history of the Innu people.
We will decide. We want to convert our opportunity to prosperity. Our recent past as people is well documented. We had, for many centuries, been a self-sustaining, self-governing society in our land, Nitissina, which we call our homeland. But we became marginalized, completely dependent communities. Our cries for help and support were unheard. But that tragic period of history may soon be behind us. On June 30th, 2 days from now, we have an opportunity to secure a bright future for our people. Indeed, for all people of Labrador. We face a decision that will echo in centuries to come. Our people will decide where to approve Jasper Davan agreements, and in doing so, forge a new place for Innu in helping shape the future of Labrador. We will establish a new, more equitable and partnership-centered relationship with Canada and Newfoundland. We will become major players in the economy of Labrador and beyond. The rights of the Innu of Labrador to lands in Labrador have always existed, but have never been settled. Approved by our people of Jasper Davan agreements will bring the certainty we all seek, which is a giant step closer. The Jasper Davan agreements include 3 agreements. Each of these agreements on its own will be significant. Together, they represent a package that the likes of which have never been seen in Canada before, and will likely never will be again. The Jasper Davan agreements is the Upper Churchill Redress Agreement, the Lower Churchill Impact Benefit Agreement, and the Land Claims Agreement in principle. The land claims alone has taken us almost 30 years to get to this point where we are at. If our people pass this package, must excuse me for a minute. I'm asking my people to do this, and I'm having. It is clear why this is important to the Innu of Labrador. If our people pass this package on June 30th, we will have established the basis for the future of our people, our land, and for the generations of the Innu that will follow us. While the word historic is often overused, the upcoming vote is truly extraordinary, historic moment for Innu and for all Labrador. These agreements will have a direct and immediate impact on the resource companies operating and seeking to operate in the Innu traditional territory. Proponents to seek develop projects in areas where Innu rights have been established or will be impacted we will need to work with us to develop a partnership approach to such developments. The days of companies coming to Innu lands, developing resource projects, taking the profits, and leaving without our involvement are over. That I can say crystal clear. Crystal clear. That I have no difficulty saying. We are not anti-development, far from it. But we must be involved and shall be involved. These are exciting times for the Innu and for all of Labrador. I'm so proud of our people and the tremendous gains we have made over the past 20 years. Thank you, Mr. Piku, and talk to you soon.
And that was the late Joseph Rich, former Grand Chief of the Innu Nation. Well, in case you missed it, here's what the announcement sounded like yesterday.
Today, I can announce that we've reached an agreement in principle in which the federal government will provide $2 billion to help the projects remain on stable financial footing. That's $1 billion as an investment in the province's portion of the Labrador Island Link and $1 billion as a loan for the Muskrat Falls and Labrador transmission assets. Secondly, and on a separate track, the federal government is prepared to commit to annual transfers that would be equivalent to the value of Canada's net revenue from the Hibernia offshore project, with revenue estimated to be around As all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians know, this has been a conversation that has been going on for many, many years between provincial government and federal governments on the issue of Hibernia, and we are very, very pleased to be able to come to this groundbreaking, forward-looking agreement for decades to come.
Today, the weight begins to lift, and we can all breathe a measured sigh of relief. With the support of the Prime Minister, a deal has been reached that answers rate mitigation for Muskrat Falls. That was the single top priority for me when I took office just under a year ago. We all know that when this project was announced, the rate proposed was over 15 cents per kilowatt hour. The budget was set at $6.2 billion and a time frame of 5 years. Now, we don't have to revisit history to know that that budget doubled, that timeline doubled. And what I heard throughout the province was the fear of an equal, crippling doubling of electricity rates. But today, thanks to our negotiations with our federal partners, the outlook is better. It is brighter. Our power rates will not double. They will actually be less than that was originally proposed at sanction. My friends, exhale.
While the Prime Minister and Premier are praising yesterday's announcement, the Innu Nation says it's a backroom deal that was reached in secret by politicians who deliberately shut out their Indigenous partner. The Innu say the announcement is a broken promise to include them along every step of the way. Eddie Rich is the Grand Chief of Innu Nation. He spoke to CBC's Anthony Germain following the announcement.
So, Chief Rich, what do you make of today's announcement?
Well, it's very surprising there, Anthony, because of like we say, it's a backroom deal, and we haven't been consulted. And when we met with the Premier back in 9th of June of this year, which is a few weeks ago, and he made a commitment to us and a promise to us, and I would just ask him the same question, like if there's any talks with about rate mitigation, and he said nothing, and he will inform us ahead of the time when it comes to the any talks with the rate mitigation.
So, Chief Rich, how did you find out about today's announcement, which involves billions of dollars? How did you find out about this announcement?
Well, these are the kind of things like I was saying to my colleagues. I said we found out through the media, and no one have contacted us from the Premier's office or anyone to give us a heads up what's the upcoming the announcement will be happening with this a day before.
So is it possible, Chief Rich, that the province would argue we needed to keep things secret to try to get the best deal possible to lower electricity rates? Do you accept that kind of reasoning?
Well, like I said, I think it's very important that we're the only we're the only Aboriginal group that we have an IBA with Nalcor. And back in 2008, we signed an IBA agreement, which is a legal document. And I think it's very important that the province of Newfoundland that need to stick with what we signed back in 2008. And I think it's very important that the province of Newfoundland that need to collaborate with the Innu Nation.
Now, apart from what you say is a broken promise, there's a complex agreement that you just talked about, reached in 2008, which actually allowed Muskrat Falls to go ahead. To oversimplify it, you get 5% of the profits from Muskrat Falls when it comes together. Is there any concern in Innu Nation that today's deal might have an effect on the bottom line, as to, how much money you actually make off it?
Well, these are the kind of things we've been asking the questions because we haven't get the really proper answer. Because as of right now, we don't know. Because of if we could get the information, the proper information, what's the numbers are about that deal between Canada and Newfoundland, and we should be able to know what exactly we're talking about here.
All right, Chief Rich, appreciate that. I guess one last question for you. Both the Premier and the Prime Minister have made steps towards reconciliation. Does this affect that today?
Oh yes, big time. Because as you know, that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been talking about reconciliation all year, and ever since he became a Prime Minister, he's where he's putting the Indigenous people right now. Because, like I said, they're doing the backroom deal between Newfoundland and federal government, which is I think that the Innu Nation would be a really big part of the discussion when it comes to these kind of discussions, because we're the only ones are having an IBA with the Nalcor.
I think people forget that 2008 agreement is a very complicated agreement on the profit. And what I'm not clear about is how does making the electricity cheaper, what effect does that have on the consumption? And does that help you guys or not? It's very complicated stuff, right?
It is very big time, yeah. And these are the kind of things that we've been waiting. And like I said, the Premier was saying that he will notify us as soon as possible, ahead of the time, which he hasn't. And it's very frustrated me because of trying to work with him and along with Innu Nation and try to build a really good working relationship and as well to have a really good collaboration with the Innu Nation and province of Newfoundland. But every word he comes, the last meeting we had with him, and every word he was saying that it's very he doesn't keep whatever he said. He's a very dishonest person. So that's how I find him right now, and it's very frustrating, and I'm very disappointed. And because these are the kind of things that we're supposed to first people to know what exactly is being talked about.
Appreciate your time. I'm sure there'll be more on this story. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And that was Innu Nation Grand Chief Étienne Rich. Now, when Premier Furey was asked about the Innu Nation's frustrations regarding the lack of consultation, he said they would be happy when they see the deal's details.
Hello, I'm Christina Rumbold from Mary's Harbour. You are listening to Labrador Morning on CBC Radio 101.7 in Mary's Harbour.
Well, by now, most of you have heard the news announced yesterday by Premier Andrew Furey and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The agreement will see the cost of electricity lowered for Newfoundland and Labradorians, and that's something Torngat Mountain's MHA Leela Evans has been advocating for. Her constituents pay some of the highest power bills in the province. We have reached Leela again this morning to continue the conversation. Welcome back, Leela.
Yes, thank you.
Now, we've heard your concerns before on high electricity rates being paid by your constituents. How does this agreement fare in addressing those concerns?
Well, Janice, the one thing I was trying to say earlier is for everybody out there listening, all Labradorians, it's very important for people to know and to remember that the Muskrat Falls cost overruns was not to impact what Labradorians pay. It was the deal was the end user would pay the cost of Muskrat Falls, and no electricity is consumed by Labradorians, and never will be. That was the intention. So our rates was never scheduled to go up. So this huge deal, $5.2 billion, coming forward, is to help the island, and I'm really, I support it. I support putting a deal in place for the people on the island will not be impacted by these huge cost overruns. But Labradorians was never to be impacted. And if you look at my district, we're paying the highest rates. All this money is going to actually lower the rate for the island users down to 14.7 kilowatt hours to keep it under control. But not in my district, and what I was advocating for, in my district, we pay 18.5 cents a kilowatt hour when we get above that 1,000, lower rate, 1,000 kilowatt hours. So on the coast, nobody can afford to heat their houses with electricity because the bills are astronomical, and it really impacts our most vulnerable populations. Our populations are getting older now, our elders, and they have difficulty getting wood and bringing wood in to heat their houses because they can't afford electricity. Single moms, low-income families, the cost of snowmobiles and the cost of gasoline now is so expensive. So the people in my district are still being impacted by 18.5 cents a kilowatt hour, the highest in the province. And I think it's shameful. And then when you look at all of this, I think that in actual fact, if this hadn't come through, the province was actually going to go back and actually make Labradorians pay the cost of Muskrat Falls as well, and we would be impacted by price hikes, which was not the original deal, and I was prepared to defend that, and try and keep them to the rates.
Now, the new rate for electricity is going to be 14.7 cents a kilowatt hour. It's also higher than the 13.5 cents that the former Premier Dwight Ball promised. But officials apparently say it's lower than what rates would have been originally when Muskrat was sanctioned, as you said. Do you think this decrease is enough?
Well, actually, it is less than what was anticipated recently. But when you look at how it was accomplished, in light of reconciliation. We had the Grand Chief come out and say that they weren't consulted, and they have an IBA, so there was a legal duty to consult with the Innu, and the Premier is on the record now after the fact, when he's responding to the concerns from the Innu Nation about not being consulted, and they have this agreement in place in the IBA. He said they'll be more happy as the information becomes available to them. And this has been the history of basically consulting when it's convenient for the province, and basically isolating and keeping the Indigenous groups in the dark when it's not convenient. And that's not the spirit of reconciliation. And we just saw that last week with the RCMP, changing out the policing for Napashish, not consulting with Napashish chief, the Innu Band Council, not consulting with the Innu Nation. And honestly, Janice, I think they thought that this was just going to happen. But I went to Napashish and I talked with the chief. I met with the Deputy Grand Chief of Innu Nation as well, and basically we had to force the issue. So when you have to force the issues, that's not consultation. That's not in the spirit of reconciliation. And it's very, very disappointing. And then when you look at my district, we have these huge cost overruns. People, when people are paying their bills, a lot of people actually get cut off. And with Newfoundland Hydro, you cannot actually get your electricity restored until you have a zero balance. And low-income families who are struggling, we got intergenerational trauma. It's a real fact on the North Coast. It's a reality for people. This isn't doing nothing to help them. Nunavut government, I've been talking to them. They're stepping up. They're trying to help their people. The Innu Nation and the Innu Band Councils, they're stepping up and trying to help their peoples. But then we look at this, and we actually have the Grand Chief of the Innu Nation, talking about the Premier and saying that he's a dishonest person. And this here in 2021, in light of all those, those hidden graves, in light of all the wrongs that were done to the Indigenous people, especially in Labrador, to the Innu and the Inuit of Northern Labrador, we really need to look at this, and we really need to actually hold the Premier to account. He should have consulted with them. There was a legal obligation. Just like back in 2018, the First Minister of Nunavut was on the record saying that this Liberal government was in violation of the land claims agreement because they didn't consult when they changed out the transportation, and left us with no freight boat that would actually bring the food in to the communities, bring the building materials in, bring our supplies, our life supplies to our communities. They didn't consult, and now we actually have to, suffer the burden of those high prices. There's no consultation. There's no spirit of reconciliation, as far as I can see.
Well, we'll leave it there again this morning. Leela, thank you so much for coming back on and finishing the conversation.
And thank you for taking the time to actually reach out and reconnect with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And that is Leela Evans. She is the MHA for Torngat Mountains. Well, have you seen strange-looking bugs or different birds around this summer? I know I've seen some pictures of people asking what those scary spiders are, or I don't know. I've been seeing some weird things myself. Well, you may be a perfect candidate for the big backyard bio blitz if you've been seeing those things. The blitz is happening across Canada and is organized by the Nature Conservancy of Canada. Piers Evans is the program director for this province and gave me a rundown on the event.
This is the Nature Conservancy of Canada's sort of national campaign to try and connect Canadians with the nature that's occurring right out their back door. It's a campaign where we're asking people across the country to sort of put on their citizen science hat and pick up their camera or their smartphone and go out and snap some photos of species that they find, whether it's kind of in their literal backyard or whether it's sort of in the backyard that maybe extends beyond their fence. We'd be interested to see what kind of species people have in the places that they visit. And we're doing that over the next few days. It starts on July 29th and goes until August 2nd.
So, Piers, why are you asking people to become citizen scientists?
Well, this sort of crowdsourced data gathering is really an incredible tool that the science has for determining a range of different things about different species. So, one of those things that we can determine that sometimes efforts like this campaign can result in is surprises in, what species we're finding where. That can mean, different species being introduced in different places, or when different species might be expanding their own range or distribution due to climate change or other factors or different kind of migration patterns. And we're also just interested in seeing, how maybe urban spaces are shaping the different species that can be found there, and even what the different variations that you can find within species just geographically. So, that's why with this effort, this backyard bioblitz, taking photos is such a big part of it because, those visual cues can really provide a lot of evidence, even if the person taking the photo may not be able to figure out exactly what it is they're looking at.
So we're talking about insects and all kinds of things that we're seeing out in our backyards, but how close of a photo are you expecting people to get?
Well, it depends on the context, really. Things like plants, bugs, they don't move too fast generally. You can usually get pretty close to them pretty safely, but obviously we want people to use their best judgment. If you happen to see a bear, maybe don't get too close. Maybe you don't even stop and take a photo. But we're looking for, as clear a photo as you can get. For things like plants, it's best to maybe snap a couple of photos. If there's a flower present, you want to capture that. You want to maybe get a good picture of the leaves of the plant. For things like fungi, if you're taking a picture of a mushroom, for example, you want to make sure that you get a photo kind of the top and the underside to take a look at the gills of the mushroom. Things like mosses or insects, you do want to get pretty close because there's a lot of detail with those species that is a lot easier to capture when you're up close and personal. Obviously, people's backyards often extend to the coast, and if you happen to see any whales or other sea life for different whale species, even kind of a photo of tail or whatever part of the animal is exposed is sometimes enough to identify it.
Now, you ran a big backyard BioBlitz last year, and it resulted in over 20,000 observations. Do you have a goal for this year?
Well, we'd like to beat that. Those 20,000 observations came in from around 1,400 participants. So, both of those numbers are numbers that we'd like to expand on. I don't have the breakdown for this province, but I'm hoping that we can kind of get those numbers for after this event is done, and we can see just kind of how many, citizen scientists and nature lovers we've got who were able to kind of make it out this weekend and snap a couple of photos and contribute.
If there is somebody listening who wants to participate in this event, how can they do so? Do they just send you guys a picture?
No, there's a website that we have for registration. You can go to natureconservancy.ca/2021 BioBlitz, and at that registration page, there's instructions on how to, if you have a smartphone, you can download the iNaturalist app. That's the platform that we're using for this initiative, and it's a really effective sort of open source data gathering platform where you do have to create a profile, and then you can kind of connect up with the 2021 Backyard BioBlitz project and start kind of snapping photos and making species identifications. If you don't have a smartphone, you can also use just your own kind of regular digital camera, and then you can sign on to the iNaturalist website just on a desktop computer. The only requirements, obviously, you do have to have an internet connection to kind of upload your photos, and it works the same way. You register on the NCC's website, you create your iNaturalist profile, this time just on the iNaturalist website, and then you connect up with the Backyard BioBlitz project, and you can upload your photos to that site, and you can either make your own guess about what you think you saw, what species you think you saw, or sometimes the iNaturalist platform will give you suggestions on what it thinks it was that you took a picture of, and then the beauty of this platform is that it allows other users to have a look at your photos and your kind of guess or your identification of that species, and they can agree or they can correct or they can kind of make their own suggestions. And so that way it's not only crowdsourced data gathering, it's also crowdsourced data verification as well.
Did last year's event result in any unique findings?
One of the sort of interesting observations I think that came out of last year was greater moon jellyfish. So it would be pretty cool to have some jellyfish come in from this province. I know we've got them around this time of year, and I think that even up in Labrador there would be some interesting species that could be photographed. Caribou or different unique Arctic plant species could be uploaded. There's lots of biodiversity in this province that we can kind of get out and connect with and appreciate that I think could maybe make the list for next year.
Well, Piers, really appreciate you telling us more about the Big Backyard BioBlitz. And if you do get anything unique to Labrador, let us know, will you?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Piers Evans is the Newfoundland and Labrador Program Director for the Nature Conservancy of Canada.
Hi, my name is Gordon Obed. Gordon Obed Sheena here in Nain. You're listening to Labrador Morning on CBC Radio 1, 95.1 here in Nain, Labrador.
The Delta variant is wreaking havoc across several states in the U.S. and straining hospital resources. And now the country's top health authority is reversing its indoor mask policy. While fully vaccinated Americans were previously told they could ditch their masks inside, now the CDC is urging them to put their masks back on in areas with high transmission rates. To weigh in on the situation to the south and what Canada can learn from it, we're joined by our house doctor, Peter Lynn. Good morning, Dr. Lynn.
Morning, Janice.
How worrying are the case counts in the U.S. now?
Well, they just topped over 100,000 per day yesterday, and so Dr. Fauci, their head doctor, on multiple interviews has said the pandemic is going the wrong way. And their former director of CDC, Dr. Frieden, said that they could see 200,000 cases per day in the next 6 weeks. And remember, their school systems open up early, and the majority of kids are not vaccinated, so they're heading into a high-risk situation. And of course, the concern that we have is that, with more people with the virus, they can make mistakes in photocopying, and that might create a new mutation. And if a mutation comes from a country that has lots of vaccines, then there's a chance that that new version has figured out how to get around those antibodies that our vaccines are helping to make for us. So that's why when countries like U.S., Israel, UK, where they have lots of vaccines and we see their case counts go up, we pay attention and we're concerned here in Canada as well as the rest of the world. Are they going to create the new super version of this virus in the future?
What are the contributing factors here that led to this surge in cases, Dr. Lane?
Yeah, the headlines are basically saying it's the unvaccinated that's driving up the new cases, and of course the solution would be to vaccinate everybody, but their program of vaccination has sort of stalled. People are not showing up for these things. I think the other part of it is when the CDC gave advice that 2 weeks after you're fully vaccinated, you're good to go, you can get rid of the mask. I think that might have helped the virus kind of spread easier, because to say 2 weeks and no mask means that the vaccine has to be 100%. It has to be perfect. And we know the CDC and many experts have said the vaccine is not perfect, so I think getting rid of the mask was probably a little too early at that moment. And so the idea is that if it's not a perfect vaccine, then we need the mask to give extra protection, and that's why CDC has now reversed that and said, look, if you're in a hot spot, even if you're vaccinated, you should still be wearing a mask in those public places, indoors and things like that. If you look at the map that they gave, 2/3 of the country is in a hot zone, so to speak, so majority of people will still have to mask up again. They've also noticed that vaccinated people can get infected. Now, the majority do not get very sick, but they can still carry the virus with them and bring it to the unvaccinated and pass it that way. And with the new Delta variant, it is a better virus. It can make 1,000 times more copies of itself than the older version of the virus, and it has a better set of keys to get into your cells. And the antibodies seem to be less sticky to it, so therefore you need more antibodies to take it out. When they told people to remove masks, it was about 1% of the cases was Delta, and now it's over 80% of the cases is Delta version. And the young kids, they're not going to have a vaccine approved for them anytime soon, so therefore they're not quite protected. And so if you have no mask, no distancing at a restaurant, then there's really nothing protecting those kids. And so I know experts always say that kids don't get very sick, the majority of them, but they can carry the virus back and bring it to grandparents and those kinds of things. So I guess the new version of the virus, no mask, no distancing policy, and everybody not being vaccinated yet, including the kids, I think those are the perfect recipe for these high case counts. And I'm hoping that the CDC saying put the mask back on might reverse some of that so that they don't hit those 200,000 per day kind of scenarios.
Now, we are ahead of the U.S. in terms of vaccination rates, but are there lessons we should draw from the path of the virus down south?
Yeah, I think that keeping the mask on is the most important one. And we've learned from Israel, they took the mask off, and within 10 days their cases zoomed up, and then they tried to put back the mask, and their cases are still at 2,000 a day. So once you sort of let it go, the virus will move, and then it's very hard to rein it back in. So if we can just keep the mask on until we really get control of the situation, that'd be good. Our first vaccination rates are fantastic. Where you are, it's great. The second vaccination rate is much better than most countries as well. But we do need to encourage people to get that second shot. The first shot, you do make antibodies. The second one will help you make more antibodies. And so remember, the Delta needs more antibodies to fight it off. So if we give you more antibodies, you have a better chance of fighting Delta. And that's why public health is saying, please get the second dose. And if you're elderly, you do make antibodies on the first shot, but not very many. So therefore, we need the second one to get you over the top. And the problem is we don't know exactly, how many antibodies do you need to protect you. But we know that more is probably better. And maybe the protection would last longer. So, for example, if I gave you, Janice, $1,000, that might not last too long, but if I gave you $1 million, then that would last a whole lot longer. So I think that's why, right now, 1 shot is good, 2 shots is better. And if you can keep that mask on, then that would be the best case scenario so that we don't have to follow the United States, UK, and Israel, where we're seeing their case counts going up.
I'll take the $1 million, please.
Yeah, the $1 million.
Now, the land border is still closed, Dr. Lin, but some Canadians may be flying to the U.S. over the summer. What should Canadians keep in mind if they are traveling to the States?
Yeah, just make sure you're heading into a high-risk country now. So, for example, Florida, it's 38,000 per day as of yesterday. So lots of virus still moving around. And remember, even though you're double vaccinated, for example, it's not 100%, so you still need the other layers of protection. So think of distance and ventilation together. So if it's lousy ventilation, then you need more distance between you and a stranger. If it's great ventilation, then you can be a little closer. And the mask stays on because then the virus has a harder time to get on board. And that way we keep antibodies as your last line of defense. So it's only when all else fails, then we need the antibodies to kick in. I know it sounds like a lot of overkill on my part, but remember, your kids are not vaccinated, and so they don't have antibodies as backup. So we might as well follow the things that protect them, which is the distance and the mask. And we should do the same thing with the elderly and immunocompromised. Let's assume that they don't make all the antibodies they need. Let's put those other layers of protection there. And if you have a stranger that says, no, I'm doubly vaccinated, and so therefore you can take off your mask, just remember New York Yankees, fully vaccinated, but they were able to carry virus in their nose, so therefore they can still pass on the virus. And I guess eating is the highest risk time in a restaurant, for example, because your mask is off, you're usually close to other people, and usually it's indoors. So let's avoid the crowds, so go a little bit earlier or a little bit later so there's not as many people. Sit outside if you have that option, and just take off your mask when you're actually eating. So the mask stays on while you're chit-chatting or waiting for food, and that cuts down your risk as well. And I know I'm a joy kill at a party, but if we just do these very simple things, then you can have a good time and not bring back any souvenirs that you don't want, So we can do it safely and still have a good time on your vacation.
Plus, I feel like we've spent a lot of money on these masks in, getting designer ones.
You might as well use them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Why put them away at this point?
That's right. It's a fashion statement now. So,
Dr. Lin, thanks so much.
Thanks, Janice.
Dr. Peter Lin is a family physician and CBC medical columnist.
Hi, this is Randy Hopkins, and you are listening to Labrador Morning on CBC Radio 1, 101.7 FM in Battle Harbour and Marys Harbour.
Do your summer plans include spending more time out on the land? If so, are bears of concern to you? With some more tips on what to do if you encounter a bear in the wild, here's human-wildlife conflict specialist Kim Titchener.
Well, certainly we want you to try to avoid these encounters in the first place by making tons of noise, traveling in groups, of course, wearing your bear spray in a holster just in case you run into them anyways, and watching for signs of bear activity such as scat, tracks, overturned rocks and logs on the trail. But what do you actually do if you run into a bear? Well, grizzly bears and black bears really don't appreciate getting surprised. So that's why we say make tons of noise on the trails. And that way, if they hear you coming, they will get out of your way most of the time. And so if you have an encounter, the first thing you want to do is group up with your family and friends, pull out your bear spray, pull off the safety, point it towards the bear, and start trying to figure out, why am I in this situation? If you weren't making a lot of noise, it's quite possible you have surprised this animal. They will let you know if you are in a defensive encounter. A defensive encounter is when you surprise the bear at close range. That bear may have cubs with them that they feel they need to protect, or even a food source such as garbage or a food cache where they've got an animal that they're feeding on. The bear will start huffing and woofing, sometimes some roaring and guttural sounds. They might start salivating, foaming at the mouth, moving around. They may stomp their feet in front of them, or even do what we call a bluff charge, where they'll run at you, stop before they make contact, or run side to side. In the situation where you have surprised a bear and you're like, yep, this bear is stressed out, you are going to group up, slowly back away, talk calmly to the animal. If the bear does make a run towards you, you are going to need to stop, stand your ground, and spray your bear spray. If the bear makes contact with you, you are going to drop to the ground and play dead and wait until the bear is gone before you get up and move. Don't make any noise. This is why we make tons of noise on the trail and why we, of course, carry our bear spray and wear it on us, practice pulling it out, because this is really key so that if you do have an accidental encounter, you've got that option. So there are a few mistakes that folks tend to make when they're out on the trail systems. One of the big ones that we see is people carrying bear bells or taking their cell phone out or speakers and playing music on the trail. We have this impression that the sound of bells or the sound of music has a meaning to bears, and it really doesn't. There are very distinct sounds that bears are listening for and are alert to. The sound of a stick breaking or a branch breaking or the sound of a bush moving. For a bear, that means there's some kind of carnivore possibly coming their way. So they're listening for those specific sounds, and they're kind of drowning out the other sounds, not listening to them. So they're very specific in what they're listening for. So the sound of the human voice calling out every couple minutes, and if they can hear that sound getting louder coming towards them, then they know they've got to get out of the way. They've got they get off the trail, get out of your way, and they know that you're not actually trying to sneak up on them. Unfortunately, when people listen to music, of course, then they no longer have the sense of sound. They're not listening to things like a branch breaking for themselves or a bush moving or the sound of a chuff of a bear saying, hey, you've got too close. And so earbuds, bear bells, and music, we do not recommend. Please leave that stuff at home and just let out a hoop and a holler every couple minutes as you go.
And that was Human Wildlife Conflict Specialist Kim Titchener. And we want to say thanks to CBC Edmonton for that piece. I feel like there would be maybe some different advice if it was to come from Labrador. Well, maybe you have some bear advice that you can share with us. Get in touch. Call the Trap line 1-888-699-8255.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.